Welcome to Higher Ed Without Borders and our special four-part series on Small College America. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Dean Hoke, and with me is my co-host, Tom Davisson. I think I'd like to talk just for a few seconds about why we're doing this series and why we think it's so important. Well, first and foremost, Tom and I are both graduates of small colleges, and we've served on trustees of our own respective alma maters. We understand that small colleges and universities offer quality, personalized education and that the classes have lower student-teacher ratios. And the small college experience builds a sense of community that benefits them for a long time.
During this series, we're going to talk with four small college presidents from across the United States about their institutions, what makes them unique and important to their communities. Also, we will discuss the challenges and their views for the future.
Tom, I'm delighted to have you as my co-host, and why don't you go ahead and introduce our very first guest?
I'd be happy to, Dean. Joining us today is Dr. Barry Ryan, president of Woodbury University, with an enrollment of approximately 1,000 students. A first-generation college student, Dr. Ryan fell in love with higher education. He has served in virtually every education context, from large state universities to private nonprofit and for-profit institutions of all sizes. He has a lengthy service as a faculty member and as department chair, founder of a Center for Teaching and Learning, dean, vice president, provost, and president. Dr. Ryan is also an attorney. His legal service has included practice, law, school teaching, and consulting. He is admitted to the bars of the Supreme Court of the United States, the Supreme Court of California and Virginia, and he also worked in the chambers of former Chief Justice William H. Rehnquist. Dr. Ryan earned his PhD from the University of California, Santa Barbara, a JD from the University of California, Berkeley, a Master of Divinity from Fuller Seminary, his BA in History from Westmont College, a postgraduate diploma in Global Business from the Said School of Business at Oxford University.
Barry, welcome, and good heavens, we may have to say good night. That's quite an introduction about you.
Very impressive.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Look, why don't we go ahead and begin as they say in the beginning, let's talk about Woodbury. As I understand it, Woodbury is one of the older higher education institutions in Southern California. Can you do a bit of a brief background on Woodbury and your students and your programs? Tell us a little bit about the school.
Sure, thank you. And thank you, Dean. Thank you, Tom, for having me. It's great to be with you today. Woodbury started, as you're absolutely right, it's one of the oldest institutions. It's the second oldest institution in the Los Angeles area, founded in 1884 in Los Angeles, and moved to its campus in Burbank, right up against the foothills, about 30 years ago. So that's geographically where we are. Woodbury started as unusually as a co-educational, or what at the time was called a co-educational male-female business school, and that was the origin. Over time, it's grown and developed significantly programmatically, and still has a strong history and focus on business, but also a lot to do with architecture at the undergraduate and graduate level. And makes a tremendous impact, not just locally, but nationally and even internationally as a school of architecture. We have other programs as well in media, culture, and design, and in the liberal arts. So it's a pretty good broad background in education, and of all the types that we think are important today for today's students. And we're very committed. This is an institution that's very committed to having working professionals as both full-time and adjunct faculty. And we're committed to all of our students having an internship during their program while they're at Woodbury, so that they are prepared for what comes afterwards. And we think we've done a pretty good job with that, and looking forward to continuing to do that.
That's great. Let me ask a quick follow-up question to that. Are most of the students from the Southern California area? Where do they come from? Do you also have international students? Tell us a little bit about some of those students.
Yeah, we do draw heavily from Southern California, in which is almost the size of a nation or a state itself in terms of population. So we do draw a lot of our students from there. But nationally, we also draw, and internationally. The international student population is an important part of our student demographic. And we are always welcoming international students, and they're drawn to various programs. Again, some of them come for business, some come for architecture, some come because of our location and our connection with the studios and with companies that are developing both technologically, but also in terms of content for entertainment purposes. And that has a very high international profile, as you can imagine.
Yeah. Dr. Ryan, with all the information in the reports and the news lately about the challenges of especially small colleges that COVID kind of exasperated and extenuated, the idea of small colleges closing across the country has made a lot of headlines, and there's lots of implications when that happens. I read a study recently that shows 50% of the students attending colleges that close their doors do not continue their education. That's startling as for the impact of our country, for the individuals, their families. What role do you think small colleges can or should play, and accreditors, in keeping more of these students continuing their education?
You know, Tom, I read that same report, and it's a tragedy to think about the students and their lives and their families, and even transgenerationally, they're affected by the closure of an institution that they're attending, and the fact that they just get derailed and off track, and that's a tragedy. That's not only a tragedy for them, but it's a tragedy for the communities in which they live and where they would be serving. And it's something that is a shame for our states and for our country as a whole when that happens. I was talking recently with president of a large state university here in California. I don't know why we don't do more to support smaller colleges and universities in this state, because we couldn't do the things that they're doing. And that's the reality, is that small college America, we fill a niche that otherwise is not going to be filled. We are able to reach different kinds of students who have different goals than those who are in a large state university. And as you mentioned in that gracious biography, I've spent time in large state universities. There's a clear mission, tremendous success for a lot of them. But the same thing is true for small colleges. Clear missions, real good indicators of success, but it's a tough time. COVID obviously was a tremendous had a tremendous effect on small colleges, disproportionately so, because there's not always the resources that a large state university can fall back on. And so it is extremely challenging. I don't think it's a matter of we being Woodbury, but we being any small college, can't overcome those challenges. But to do so, we have to be pretty smart. We have to be market sensitive. We have to be sure that we're doing the best that we possibly can, and that we're doing the right things and not doing the wrong things. And that's a challenge. It keeps us on our toes, definitely.
Well, kind of a follow-up of that, the old adage, it takes a village. I think the same is true in higher education. It takes everybody working together to help advance the cause of education in our country. What role do you think maybe that accreditors might be able to play? Somebody's got to be able to take the lead and bring everyone together, be it state education departments, the U.S. Department of Education, accreditation, the large universities, small colleges. There's a whole group that needs to be brought together, and somebody has to take the lead in that. What role do you think that accreditors might play in that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And accreditors have a key role to play. And I had the privilege of working with WASC for a number of years and being on the commission. And one of the things I was very proud of in my work with WASC on behalf of WASC was that WASC took very seriously not trying to apply the same exact framework on every institution. So there was a cookie cutter look at an institution, but rather to look at an institution's mission and ask the question, is what they're doing in accordance with their mission? Are they able to fulfill their mission? What are the, and not necessarily, you're not adjusting the criteria for review, but you're saying, what's the primary focus here? Is what is an institution trying to do? How well is it doing it? And are there things that we can provide as accreditors that can be helpful? And especially for a smaller, struggling institution, what are the things that we can do? And there are things accreditors can do and should be doing, but that awareness, where it starts with that is that awareness that you can't use a one size fits all when you're looking at the great that's the genius of American education. The diversity of our education in every way is part of the genius of American higher education. So having that openness and that flexibility and recognizing one size doesn't fit all, and having representatives of small colleges as well as large universities and even non-higher education institutions on the accrediting body can bring the perspective that really would be helpful as we try to find our way through all this. But yes, that's a key role.
Dr. Ryan, I agree. And having had the privilege of chairing accreditation teams, both in the United States and internationally for 25 years with SAC-COC, the Southern Association, one of the challenges I always had was team members that were trying to apply the rules as it was for their institution to the institution we were evaluating. And that, as you addressed earlier, that's a challenge that we all have to do. Is they have unique missions, and that's what we should be measuring against. And that flexibility that the accreditors can bring to the conversation is critical in that allowing them to continue to do what they do so well that other schools cannot do.
And the role of the visiting team or the review team for an accreditor is exactly what you said. And I've seen the same thing. There's a tendency to try to want to apply whatever my experience is to wherever I go to participate in review. And that's something we have to get beyond that. And as educators, we're committed to having perspectives beyond our own. And so that's really important, because when that review team or visiting team, that's where the rubber meets the road with these institutions. And so preparing them, training them, instilling those kinds of values in the team is critically important. So I'm glad to hear your experience in that regard as well.
Well, Barry, why don't we talk? Let me go back to something you said a little bit earlier, and that's in terms of your experience. You've been obviously in the small college world, but you've also been in the larger state universities, right? If I remember correctly.
Yes.
Can you do a little bit of a comparison with what a small college administrator, senior administrator may go through versus what the bigger colleges and universities? Can you talk a little bit about the challenges and the advantages that you have seen in terms of your experience?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I'm very fortunate to have had that variety of experience. It wasn't planned on my part, but it was something that I've learned and enjoyed something about every institution I've ever served. So I'm really grateful for that. Some of the things are things that you would naturally think of. So obviously, if you're in a large university, state or private, there are resources that you have available as an administrator, a leader, a board member. You have resources that a small institution just isn't going to have. I mean, yes, I have some background in law, and the reality is today's environment, higher education, is absolutely infused with legal issues, legal knowledge, legal perspectives, legal bills, and in a large institution that may have a large in-house counsel's office is able to deal with those things in a way that a small institution has to be really careful, because that can drain the resources that you're already trying to keep available for the education of your students. So there's that kind of a challenge that's much tougher for a smaller institution. The advantages of smaller institution, which we don't always take advantage of, are the ability to make changes. So when there are changes in the marketplace, when there are things that arise as new areas of study, of concentrations or degree programs, it should be much easier in a smaller institution to be able to adapt programming to meet those needs if you're aware of it. And for a larger institution, that's hard to do. It takes some time. It takes a lengthy, and understandably, there's a structure that goes with that, but it can make it very difficult to react quickly to changes and be able to change. Both institutions, both types of institutions, large and small, share a lot of things in common though. And the questions that I've heard in both those institutions properly revolve around: what are our students doing? What are they learning? What happens with them afterwards? How are we tracking that? How are we making adjustments to improve the educational experience of our students? And both of those questions, both those institutions ask those questions, I've found, and very sincerely, and with a desire to do what's best for the student. So both of those have that. The smaller institution does have the ability to do it on a more granular level with smaller numbers. Just the numbers make a huge difference. Being able to have smaller class sizes, being able to actually know your students. And you can do it in a large institution, but it's a lot harder to do. So there are advantages and disadvantages, but we actually need each other. We need every type of institution in higher education. And so my hope is that we can all work together to do that for the good of our students, but for the good of our society as a whole, because higher education makes the biggest difference in people's lives, in our communities, in our nation, in our world. It is the single most important factor in affecting long-term change.
Right. One quick thing here is that you also mentioned about being a trustee, and you've kind of been on all sides of this. Talk a little bit about how you see, particularly in a small college environment, what's the role of the trustee? Well, how do you, as a president, see what their role is, and how do they interact? Is it different?
Yes, it is different. And again, I've seen that in a state university or an entire state system and its board versus a small college board. There are some structural differences, but it's really a function of size, involvement, awareness, and the reality is the larger the system, larger the university, the more as a board member, the more removed you are from the student experience and being able to assess that. You really tend to have to assess that because of the size through reports. In a smaller college environment, you can assess that by being on the campus, inviting students to participate in events where board members are present. And there's more of an ability in a small college environment, for example, when you have a board that has professional experience in some of the fields that your students are hoping to enter. Those board members can play a really key role in advising, well, here's where the profession is going now. Here's where this business sector is going now. And they can play an advisory role that can be a lot better taken advantage of by the students and by the faculty for that matter. So that size makes a difference. Some of the great value from smaller college boards comes from board members who are alums of the institution, because they have both the practical experience outside the institution, but they also know the institution historically and have that perspective, which can be enormously helpful to me, to others as administrators, but also to our students. The danger that's a little heightened in a small college environment is when boards become overly involved in operational details. That tends not to happen in a large state university context just because they don't have the opportunity, frankly. But in a smaller college environment, that's a temptation. And so that's a delicate balance. President plays a key role in that, along with the board chair and key board members, to make sure that everybody's staying in their lane, basically. But the value that a board brings in a small college institution, you can't overestimate it.
Dr. Ryan, everybody knows that higher online education has made a dramatic impact on higher education in the last 20, 25 years. Some of it very good, some of it questionable. But COVID has really brought that to light in a very, very big way and has changed some people's attitudes about not only the quality, but the necessity of online education. Experiencing it myself, there's a real challenge, especially, not maybe especially, but also in small colleges, of introducing online education to the traditional faculty members, the students, and others, as well as the challenge of the actual expense of introducing online education. There's a tremendous expense involved in this, as well as a steep learning curve for not just the students, but the faculty as well, on how to properly teach online programs. How does the president of a small college introduce that concept and get people to come on board with that? That seems like a real challenge to me.
It is. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's for all the reasons you just said. That's especially a challenge for smaller institutions because, well, for one thing, and COVID has helped us in this regard. It's helped us rethink how we're doing these things. It's helped us rethink what is it our students need to be successful. And I think there have been some good experiments in the last couple of years with regard to that, and there have been some failures, but we learn from the failures too. I think one thing we've learned is it's not just flipping on a Zoom camera and having the faculty member talk to the students. It's not that easy. And online, that's not online education. That's a Zoom meeting. It's a different thing. It's a different function. And it's important, and we're all well aware of that. But that's not the same as online education. So the students' demand for I won't say online, but yeah, online is only part of it. But students' demand for accessibility that fits their schedules, and the modalities that they need, it's obvious. And I think what happened with the pandemic, and it's still happening, is students recognizing that they need flexibility in their education. Not all of them. There will always be a percentage that are looking for what I'm going to call a traditional residential education, broad-based, 4-year bachelor's program. There's always going to be a segment of the population, and there are advantages to that. But increasingly, as financial pressures, look at our economy today, students need to work more. Our student demography is changing. It's becoming older. And by older, I mean just getting outside of the 18 to 22, getting into the 20s, 30s, and beyond. People who are wanting to pursue a different profession, because that's the other thing that the pandemic taught us is, hey, maybe we need to stop and take a look at our life. Are we really pursuing our values? And if you want to change something in your life, the best way to change it is through getting the proper education. So small colleges can offer that. The transition needs to be a gradual one, because just like you said, it's not just the students who need to have training and understanding of how things work in that environment, what it takes for things to work well in that environment, but the faculty need to. And it's not an automatic easy switch. It really takes careful planning, takes time, does take resources. So it's an incremental process, but it really does have to happen. And what has to happen for small colleges is we have to learn how to be successful in all those different modalities, not forsaking the traditional modality, but learning the new ones as well, and how to blend that, how to hybridize that, and that it takes some time. Those who can't adjust to that are probably going to fail, because that is one of the essential abilities. You adapt in order to survive and thrive and continue to execute your mission. It takes adaptability and flexibility.
Barry, let me go into something a little bit different with you, and that's a little bit more from the personal side. I mean, most of your professional life has been in higher education, even though you have certainly gone in and out of that. But you seem to rather love it,
Yes,
both as a student and as an administrator. But I'm curious about two things. Number one, what attracted you down this path, this university career? And secondarily, did you have mentors? Did you have people that helped you along the way? And what are some of the lessons you learned? about becoming a university leader?
Those are great questions, Dean, and it helps me reflect a little bit. I actually remember, now I'm a first generation college student and very privileged because of that. My parents knew how important it was, even though they hadn't experienced it. So they helped enable me to have a college education to start with. And I still remember my first class on my first day, and I remember what the professor talked about. And on that very first day, I thought, this is fantastic. I love this. And it was an exchange of ideas and thoughts and perspectives and readings. And I just thought, this is the most exciting thing I've ever experienced. And as I went on, even in my bachelor's program, I just was in love with. I was in love with the atmosphere of learning, and lifelong learning to me. I don't think there's a choice. We're all going to be lifelong learners,
yeah.
Whether we like it or not. Let's pick the ways that we like that are really going to be helpful. So that's kind of how it started. And when by the time I had finished my undergraduate experience, I actually had a moment that could have been very discouraging. And we didn't have much of a career planning program at my college. It consisted of meeting with your department chair 2 weeks before graduation, where he or she sat down with you and said, "So what are you going to do after graduation?" That was it. And I remember that conversation crystal clear. I said, "Well, I've enjoyed this so much. I've really been thinking that I should go into teaching." And he fell back in his chair, literally, and said these exact words: "I have no doubt that you have the gray matter for it, but I seriously doubt you'll ever be able to speak in front of a group."
Wow.
So,
hello.
my first reaction was complete depression. And I thought, this is what now I don't know what I had. I kind of had a plan, and now I don't have it anymore. But then that turned to, hey, wait a minute, this is kind of a challenge. And I was able to, when I taught my first class, my first large class, not as a TA, but as a professor, it was a class of 800 students in the university theater. And I called him and I said, "You know what? I think I learned how to speak in front of a group." He was very gracious about that. But that's really kind of where it started in my life for that. I just pursued it. And as doors opened, I pretty much every time a door opened, I walked through it because I thought, this is going to be exciting. This is going to be interesting. And higher education has changed, even during my professional lifetime, and for the better in some ways, not necessarily for the better, but in terms of changing lives, it's the best thing going. And so that's what I've loved. And what I've learned is kind of what I was talking about before: flexibility. It's really about being flexible. It's listening as well as talking, and that's been a key for me, because when I listen to our students, to our faculty, to our staff, to our board, I learn, and I take that not just as a responsibility, but a privilege to be able to listen and learn and consider and implement and lead. And leadership is always a cooperative thing. It's in my experience, it's collegial by nature. It doesn't mean that you don't have to make tough, unpopular decisions. Yeah, you do. And if you don't, if you can't handle making tough, unpopular decisions, don't seek leadership. So it's not that most things are like that, but that's the nature of leadership. And you have to know in your heart of hearts what's right, what do you believe is right, and be willing to stand for what you believe is right. And at the end of the day, go home and look in the mirror and say, yeah, I was true to my values. I was true to what I believe in. And if you can do that, you can get through almost anything.
Very good. Tom, you have the last question.
Okay. Yeah. Dr. Ryan, we've all read the stories of the number of students coming into college age is reducing. And one of the advantages colleges and universities have had that businesses would love to have had is we know 18 years out how many college age students we're going to have in this country, because we know the birth rate. Mm-hmm. And that has been declining and is projected to continue to decline going into the next 10 to 12 years at least, and maybe beyond. That can be a rather gloomy picture to paint. There are other sources of students that a college can look to try to supplant some of the loss of that age group, the 18 to 22-year-old. What do you see the future of, particularly small colleges, with these kind of onerous bits of information floating around out there? What do you see the future of small colleges being?
Yeah, those are all, and we talk about the demographic cliff in the United States, that in terms of first-time freshmen and what's going to happen in terms of population. We've seen a huge drop-off in California. California Community Colleges just announced that student population in community colleges in this state has dropped 28%.
Right.
Those are remarkable numbers. If colleges just keep doing what they're doing, small colleges that are kind of on the edge, they're not going to be successful. So they really have to adapt, and that adaptation takes a couple of forms in my mind. One is we have to recognize the need to internationalize. The whole world has been globalizing, for better and for worse. COVID is an example of that. But our education institutions, we have a lot to offer, and many folks around the world really want an opportunity. So even small colleges need to find ways of internationalizing. And part of that involves bringing students from abroad. Part of it involves sending your students abroad yourself. There are many facets to that, but the internationalization, because the population is growing in many parts of the world, and the need for education is absolutely growing around the world. So there's that. In terms of what we offer, we have to think beyond the 18 to 22 demographic and realize the educational needs of adults beyond that age are continuing and growing, and especially as the nature of our work changes. So we need to be able to adapt and offer not just degree programs, but certificate programs and even seminars. I mean, think about the different modalities we can offer things that are going to appeal to the term working adult is probably used most frequently. But that's the reality. Continuing education of our own alumni, because the needs in many of their jobs have changed. The educational requirements have changed. We should be the place that they go to look for help, to make those adaptations and to be able to grow professionally. So I think that's how we do it. There's the need for education hasn't changed. And in fact, it's growing. That particular demographic is shrinking. So the reality is we need to find ways to adjust to meet those needs in other demographics. And the opportunity is there for institutions that are agile, nimble, market aware, and committed to their mission. And your mission can take place in various settings. And that's what we have to find, is how to execute that mission in different settings and with different people.
Well, the one thing I'm sure about is that Woodbury's in fine hands, and that they will be one of the successful ones.
Yes.
I'm afraid we're running out of time. And so I think we need to go ahead and close. And I'd like to thank our special guest, Dr. Barry Ryan, president of Woodbury University. And that concludes our special episode of Higher Ed Without Borders, Small College America. If you'd like to comment on today's show and suggest future guests, please go to www.higheredwithoutborders.com, comments section. And on behalf of our guest, Dr. Barry Ryan, Tom Davisson, our company Edu Alliance, and myself, thank you very much. And make sure to subscribe via your favorite podcast app. Barry, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
This has been a production of Edu Alliance, an international higher education consulting firm with offices in Abu Dhabi and Bloomington, Indiana. Nathan and Hoke, along with their team of experienced professionals, have assisted universities worldwide. To learn more about Edu Alliance, go to our website, www.edualliancegroup.com. You will find details on our podcast, contact information, and our services. Thank you.